On the little island I grew up on, there was a story of a beast that would come into your home at night and fiddle with kids. These stories turned out to be true. He entered homes at night dressed in a rubber mask and nail-studded wristlets, attacking women and children. His reign of terror went on for a period of 11 years from 1960 as the beast roamed the island. The perpetrator turned out to be a local man named Edward Paisnell, who was caught in 1971. Over a period of 13 months between 1965 to 1966, the town of Point Pleasant in West Virginia reported seeing a winged beast with big red eyes. The whole area was in a sort of a mass hysteria during those 13 months, with people reporting all kinds of things from men in black to alien abductions to fairies and leprechauns. The beast was last seen standing on the Silver Bridge, and then the Silver Bridge collapsed. The beast wasn't reported again afterwards. I lived right outside Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania as a teenager in a little poor town called Swissvale. The next communities over are Rankin and Braddock, which are steel production heyday ghost towns that have been plagued with poverty. A strip of wood lined by a train track followed the river upon which our communities reside. Right next to the river looms the decrepit abandoned steel mill I believed once called Carey Furnace. As teenagers do, my friends and I used to cut through the park, across the tracks and to the river to drink, smoke pot and hang out. Eventually, we started exploring the steel mill. I loved it. The graffiti and sculptural artists, the wildlife that randomly took over, the bums who made it home, etc. All made it a worthwhile adventure. I became comfortable there. Then my friends told me about an abduction and assault of a teenager who was found clothesless and bloodied, strung up on a set of city steps. The killer was an insane man who dressed as a clown with a horrid, blood-stained mask. He said he lived in the woods and in the steel mill. He walks the tracks with a butcher knife he hasn't even bothered to clean. Don't come here alone. I got into a fight with a boyfriend one night and stubbornly decided to walk alone from the river, across the tracks and through the woods. I got to the tracks, turned and looked at the steel mill. Further down the tracks I saw a figure. I couldn't see a face, but the baggy pants were rather clown-like. I ran like you wouldn't believe. I've never felt fear like that before. It was probably a bum, but who takes a chance with an urban legend like that? There was a legend in Andros in Bahamas that there used to be a midget-sized creature that lived in the woods and who would steal children. Then recently, they found evidence of there being a midget-sized creature that lived in the woods. It turns out it was a 3-foot-tall ground-dwelling owl called Charney. In San Antonio, there was a school bus which broke down on a set of train tracks. After getting stuck there, a train immediately barreled down the tracks, and before any of the children could get out of the bus, the train and the bus collided and tragically killed all on board. It was such a tragedy that they eventually named all of the nearby streets after these children. So as you drive past a mental institute, on roads named after dead children, you come to a hill. On this hill is where the road meets the train tracks. If you park your car on the tracks and then wait for a bit, you will suddenly notice that your car randomly starts moving by itself off of the tracks. It's even more odd because your car doesn't go down the hill, but instead it goes up the hill. If you put white powder on your bumper, you go and look to find tiny fingerprints. Supposedly, those prints are proof of the reason why your car moved by itself off of the tracks. It's because the ghosts of the children who died in the wreck those years ago are what pushed you off the tracks to save your car and your life from being hit by a train like they were. I had a football coach back in high school who once told us a story that freaked us out all pretty bad. He had a coaching job at a small college in Montana when he was younger and newly married. One evening he was making his long commute home along fields when he sees a hitchhiker. Being in small town, he pulled over to let the guy in. Hitchhiker was wearing an outdated style of suit. He also had a big, stylish hat. He looked like he was out of the 40s and sort of like a pimp. My teacher thought it was weird that he was so overdressed. He got in without a word. When asked where he needs to go, he just pointed forward. They drove on. My teacher tried making simple conversation, but the guy wouldn't speak or even acknowledge him. He just pulled his hat down like he was trying to sleep. Then suddenly, out of nowhere, the guy just tips up his hat, looks out the window and says, "Stop the car, now." My teacher pulls over and lets him out. The guy stands on the side of the road for a second and just runs off into the field beside the road until my teacher couldn't see him anymore. After a long enough wait, my teacher started to accelerate on the road. As he got back on the road, when he looked in his rear view mirror, all he saw was the hitchhiker, on all fours like an animal, running after the truck at an inhuman speed. Eventually, he was able to get up to speed and lost sight of the guy in his mirror. He then stopped at a gas station to use a payphone to call his wife at home to tell her the story and to lock up the house. She thinks he's just messing with her, and he has been talking to her co-worker about the hitchhiker. When he asked why she would think that, apparently at her office in the town she worked in, one of her co-workers told her a story of the exact same thing happening to them. And it is a well-known urban legend in that town. She thought it was just folks playing with the new girl at town, who had to drive home alone at night. My teacher assured her that he was not lying, and she evidently believed him and can vouch for her side of the story, because she showed up to one of the fundraisers and I asked her about it. So yeah, now I just avoid lonely roads in Montana. A friend of mine from college had a project for his astronomy class, and he needed to take progression pictures of a constellation over a course of a night. He went out to a field in the middle of nowhere and set up his camera on a timer next to his truck, where he slept that night. Next morning he's looking through his pictures and he sees a picture of the constellation. And a picture of him sleeping in his truck. I live in northern Australia, and everyone growing up in my town knows of the legend of Pana Woman. She was a woman who was assaulted by Japanese fishermen. She hung herself from a poinciana tree when she discovered she was pregnant. She is said to appear as a beautiful woman to entice men, with long dark hair, dressed in a white gown, and is said to appear at our army reserve. When I was around 12 and my younger brother was 10, one day he was in his room and I was in the lounge room on the computer. He came barreling out from his room just screaming, "Can you hear that? Can you hear that?" before dragging me over to the window. There was a faint feminine moan. We could hear it moving from the window we stood at to the one across the room and back in a clockwise direction. The wind had picked up with the noise despite how still the night had been. The sound became so loud that we were on the floor covering our ears crying. When I brought it up recently, my brother agreed that it was almost as if the sound had been in our heads. We found out the next day that our oldest siblings had been at the army reserve that night before they came home, had climbed the concrete pillars to the locked gun turret and had been taunting the Poinciana woman before they left when they heard footsteps, assuming it was security. What creeps me out most is that not long after this happened, I realized that there was a Poinciana tree outside of the window. During a short-term job, I was housed near a reservation, and one night I swore I saw a coyote running across an open space about quarter mile out on his hind legs. I told the locals about it. They told me it was probably a skinwalker and how things like that happen out here, and that I shouldn't speak of my experience freely to anyone. One of them introduced me to a healing man of a tribe to make sure I was cleansed of bad spirits, in case the encounter marked me in any way. He told me about terrifying encounters that other people have had with these creatures, and to not think about them or seek them out while I was there, or they would know. It was seriously creepy stuff. I didn't have another encounter while I was there, thankfully. When I left, the locals told me I was very brave and had a strong mind. We have an urban legend in Venezuela called El Silbón, the Whistler, typical of the wetland, plains and prairies regions we call Lanos. Description is usually of a man dressed in cowboy rags with a wide brim hat that hides his skeletal face. He roams the countryside and patches of bush at night, with drooping shoulders, downcast stare and a heavy bag full of bones and half-decomposed remains slung over his back. There are two distinctive features, however, that make him stand out. He continuously whistles, a high chord progression that goes higher in tune with every note, and he is unnaturally tall and strong, with some accounts describing him as towering over 6 meters in height. His origin is not clear, with some tales stating him as an accursed parasite. Whatever he is feared by lone travelers, especially drunk or unfaithful men that travel through the country. Story has it that his ominous whistle is suddenly heard very loud and close, yet the source cannot be pinpointed, and contrary to logic, when the sound gets lower and appears more distant, it is an indication of his immediate proximity. He will then kill his victim by strangling or by concussion and devours the victim, only to throw their bones in the bag. He can be seen occasionally warding over the high walls of haciendas, fincas. An honest prayer should keep him away.